So a couple of months ago I decided to join the $100 gaming PC build challenge, although I'm going to be doing it with a slight twist. Over here in the UK we obviously don't use dollars, and the conversion rate between $100 and pounds, which is what we do use, it's actually not that great. It only leaves us around £80 and you can't build a lot for that. So instead I decided to do the £100 gaming PC build challenge, and this is what I came up with. Now in 2024 you don't get a lot for your money, particularly when you're building gaming PCs, and particularly if you are looking at the new market. And even in the UK today, the used market is not that good. It's always good to keep yourself on your toes by taking part in a challenge like this, because you go back through where you can actually get cheap parts from, you can kind of see what the market's like, where it's going. But for those of you that don't know what the $100 gaming PC build challenge is, it's basically an opportunity to challenge yourself to build a gaming PC for under $100. Now, of course, I'm going to be doing it for under £100 because that's where we are in the UK and that's the currency that we use. And I think I've come up with something pretty decent. Now, I know a lot of you will be saying there's hundreds of videos out there of people building gaming PCs for under $100 or under £100. And very often they are using systems that are pre-builds and just dropping a graphics card in it basically. But the $100 gaming PC build challenge does actually come with some rules. The first rule is quite obvious. You cannot spend over $100, or in our case £100. The second rule is that it has to be an actual PC build. You cannot use a pre-built system and just drop a graphics card in. You have to actually put all of the components together yourself. And the last rule is that you can't use makes rates. You can't use things that you managed to pick up for free or things that your friends have sold you really cheap. For those instances, you can use those parts, but you will have to apply the average selling price that it currently is on eBay. Now, I will admit in 2023/2024, I found this very difficult to do because the prices of components here in the UK, they're really not that cheap. Even on the pre-owned market, people want a pretty premium for particularly things that are decent. So we are very restricted in what we can build, and that is exactly what this system is. It's a very limited and restricted system, but it should play games. My original plan for this build was to pick up what most people would say is the obvious, a second or third gen Intel platform, but unfortunately, when I was actually trying to source them, people want a bit of a premium for them too, so I had to go even older. I did actually manage to get an Intel Core system, but this one is actually on a first gen platform. Now, the first gen platform is very old now and it is quite limiting in what it can do, but for the motherboard, I managed to get an MSI H55M-E23. It's actually a very nice micro ATX board. It's got 2 DIMM slots. It doesn't have any NVMe slots, but we've got SATA ports, and to be honest, it was a pretty clean example. I managed to pick that motherboard up for around £15, and it came with an i5 processor included. I do believe that the processor in that was an i5 760, and I thought we could do much better than that, so I decided to pick up something else. The motherboard also came with the stock Intel cooler, which we are going to be keeping because we want to keep costs down. But when it does come to that CPU, I managed to actually get a much better one for around £5, and that CPU is the Intel Core i7-860. Now, the i7-860 still isn't much when it comes to more modern platforms, but it is going to be much better than the i5 due to the fact that it's got 4 cores and 8 threads, so that's actually going to really help us when it comes to playing games. For memory, I managed to pick up 2 sticks of 4GB of DDR3, so that's 8GB in total. That again will be limiting us, but again, we are stuck to a specific budget here. For storage, I went for something super basic, and I managed to pick up a Western Digital 250GB SATA SSD. That will go with the system perfect, and it will hold our operating system plus a bunch of games. The power supply is a Corsair CX500. That's a 500-watt power supply and is more than enough for the system. And I'm actually pretty proud of the case I managed to score. I actually waited for a long time to pick up a decent case. I didn't want to spend a lot on a case, and I wanted something that was micro ATX just so it kind of went with the system quite well, and I managed to pick up this. This is a Cooler Master NR400, and I managed to pick it up off eBay by now for just £19. That is an absolute bargain, and I'm not really sure that the seller knew what they had because they just listed it as a micro ATX case. It is a pretty decent case. It has lots of airflow, it has lots of space, it's got rubber grommets, so all round it's in pretty decent condition. But it isn't a gaming PC without a graphics card, and to be honest, the graphics card was one of the hardest things to find. Typically, I'm pretty sure most people probably have issues with that because they are still quite expensive, even here in the UK on the used market. If you want anything that's reasonably modern, you're going to have to pay a premium for it, but I think I managed to get a good one. I did have some rules around the graphics card that I wanted to use on this, which is why it took me the longest to actually pick it up. I did want something that supported DirectX 12 because that will obviously expand the library of games that we can play. It also needed to have a minimum of 4GB of VRAM because Anything lower than that nowadays is really going to limit anything that you can do. And of course, with these requirements, I find it quite difficult, but I think I managed to find a pretty decent one. The graphics card I picked up for this machine is a Zotac Geforce GTX 970, 4GB. It is actually a pretty decent graphics card. It is still well supported by Nvidia, and to be honest, it probably holds the rest of the system up. Now, the hardware pairing in this machine is something that you probably wouldn't put together, but we are on a limited budget. The graphics card is far too powerful for the CPU, and the CPU is going to be the bottleneck throughout. But of course, if you did want to build a system like this, or if you had one kind of laying around that you were playing on, you could actually upgrade the platform later on and keep the graphics card, and you'll actually get extra performance. So it's kind of like a free upgrade when you kind of do that. Running through the complete specs and the prices of this system, for the CPU, we got the Intel Core i7-860. We actually paid £5 for that at CEX here in the UK. For the motherboard, we got the MSI H55M E23. I managed to pick that up from eBay for just £15, and of course it came with the i5 processor, but they're actually not worth that much anymore. You could probably get 50p for it if you were to trade it in, so it's probably not worth it. It also came with the stock Intel cooler, so that saved us a little bit of money there. For RAM, we got the Crucial DDR3, 8GB, that's 2 times 4GB, and on CEX here in the UK, you can pick that up for 75p a stick, so that brings it to a total of £1.50 for RAM. For storage, we've got the Western Digital Green 250GB SATA SSD, again from CEX here in the UK, we managed to pick that up for just £12. The Corsair CX500 500-watt power supply will cost us £15, that was from a local sale a couple of months ago. The case is the Cooler Master NR400, pretty decent case, and I managed to pick that up from eBay for just £19. For the graphics card, of course, we've got the GeForce GTX 974GB, and I actually managed to pick that up from eBay for just £32. That actually came onto eBay as a buy now, and I quickly snapped it up because it wasn't going to stay around for long. That brings the total of this machine to £99.50, which means I actually built this machine for less than £100. I got 50p change, and you're not going to do a lot with 50p. Maybe you can actually get a case fan. One thing we are missing from this system is cooling. I kind of felt that it wasn't worth actually investing in that, particularly trying to get the components I wanted. So maybe if you could get a case fan from your local Facebook marketplace for 50p, you could do the machine for £100 as well. So all in all, I think I met the criteria of the challenge. The system costs less than £100. It wasn't built from any kind of pre-build. It's actually individual parts, and I completely built a custom system. And all of the components in here were bought individually. There was no mates rates, there was nothing for free. I managed to pick them up from local stores, from local marketplaces, and eBay. But how well will a system like this play games? Now, I didn't think it was fair to actually throw this system against some of the latest and greatest, because it clearly will not play them. The CPU is going to be the biggest bottleneck in here. And then when we come to things like 8GB of RAM, even modern games nowadays are just going to ask for way more than that kind of stuff. So instead, I thought what I would do is actually benchmark some of my most favourite back catalogue games. And if you haven't played any of these games, you should definitely check them out, because I actually really loved them, and a lot of people did in the day. By popular demand, we tested Black Mesa. That is probably one of the best remakes of probably one of the best games ever made. It was released in 2020, and we tested it with a 1080p resolution and an ultra graphics preset. The game ran beautifully smooth throughout, and we managed to get an average of 129 frames per second, with a 1% low of 89. Of course, that meant that the game was more than playable, and you could even bump up the resolution here to 1440p with a normal or high setting, and you could still get a great 60 FPS experience. In Halo 4 with a 1080p resolution and a high preset, we managed to get an average of 125 frames per second, with a 1% low of 62. Now you could probably bump that game up here to 1440p and still get a great experience, although you might suffer a little bit on the 1% lows, but will that really matter with a single player experience like this? Homefront is probably one of my favourite games to revisit now and again. I actually think the game is fantastic, and playing it at 1440p with a high preset, we managed to get an average of 62 frames per second with a 1% low of 41. You could actually boost this game up a little bit here if you wanted to improve those 1% lows by dropping the resolution to 1080p, but this just goes to show what a system like this can actually play. You can get away with a 1440p experience here, particularly when the game is a single player game. In Spec Ops The Line, we ran the game in 1440p with a high preset, and we managed to get an average of 101 frames per second with a 1% low of 59. Again, that game gave a more than playable experience here, and it looked fantastic too. You could again improve those 1% lows by just simply dropping the resolution to 1080p. I'm not exactly sure how many people would be building a system or using a system like this for 1440p gaming, but for those of you that do love the old classic games, you can get away with it, and it's going to give you a great cinematic experience. Tomb Raider is a little bit newer than the other games that we tried, and it's reasonably easy to play. We managed to run it on this system in 1440p with a high preset, and we managed to get an average of 95 frames per second with a 1% low of 54. Again, that meant that the game was more than playable, and you could increase those 1% lows if you just dropped the resolution, but I don't think you would need to with this one. Now that we know that the system can play the older kind of back catalogue games perfectly fine, even in a 1440p resolution for most of them, I did want to test it with something a little bit more modern. Now, of course, we're not going to throw Alan Wake 2 against this. It just simply will not play that game, or at least you're not going to get any kind of decent experience from it. You can't even get it from a modern graphics card, let alone this kind of thing. So I decided to try something probably a little bit less demanding, but also a fantastic game. And that game is, of course, Stray. Stray was released in 2022, and it has a bit of a cult following. It's not the most demanding game, but it can be quite testing to some modern hardware. We actually managed to run the game in 1080p with a medium setting, and we got an average of 71 frames per second with a 1% low of 26. Now, with this kind of performance, the game actually plays pretty decently, although with the low 1% lows, you do get a little bit of stuttering on the screen when turning fast, in particular when loading new areas. It's not all the time, but it is enough to notice, and lowering the settings to low would probably provide a better experience, but the game is more than playable, and you can play it all the way through, even on those settings, and you could still have a great time. Now, considering this system does play games like Stray and you can kind of get away with it, and it plays older games like that, I probably wouldn't advise you go out there and build something like this, not in 2024. There are much better options out there. You just need to increase your budget. But for those of you that only have £100, you could actually build a system like this and still game. And that is one of the beauties of PC gaming. I think we forget sometimes that PC gaming, there's so much power in them, because if you have a budget of £100 or £10,000, there is always something for you, and anybody can play games. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this system. Is there anything that you would have changed in it, or anything that you would have swapped around? I would have actually liked to have a slightly higher powered CPU for this, and maybe we'll try it again sometime and we'll do something a little bit different, or maybe even we'll lower the budget and see if we can build something for even less. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content and you want to see us build another system just like this. I'm sure we will be doing something soon, and I'm sure, as always, we'll catch you guys in the next one.